This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Roshan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? Welcome to Inspiring Design with Roshan. Today is one of the most technologically advanced episodes, at least the topic will be. Today is all about cyber physical systems and robotics. So who do we have lined up for today? None other than the Research Director, Sue Keay from CSIRO's Data 61. Sue set up the world's first robotics vision research center and now leads CSIRO's Data 61 Cyber Physical Systems program. In 2018, she developed Australia's first robotics roadmap, highlighting how advances in robotics and AI will impact on every sector of the Australian economy. She's also known as a superstar of STEM, Science and Technology Australia. Welcome to the show, Sue. Let's get inspiring design.
Thanks, Roshan.
Can we start off with a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, I never expected to end up in robotics. So I grew up in a family of early adopters of technology.
Yeah.
So we were one of the first families in the street to have a computer. But I didn't really think too much about that. When it came time to think about going to university, though, I decided that I wanted to focus on science just because I felt it was creative and that I wanted to have a job that was interesting and would keep me, I guess, interested for the length of a long career.
Yeah.
And at university, I studied earth sciences and I pursued that for a number of years. And then I moved out of being an active research scientist and moved more into research management and commercialization. And eventually the opportunity to set up a robotic vision research centre came up. And I really leapt at that opportunity because my sister's been in robotics for some time.
Yeah.
My sister is actually the managing director of a group called Silicon Valley Robotics in the US, and they support startup robotics companies. It's funded by some of the early successful robotics companies in the US. So for many years, she's been telling me that robotics is the way of the future and that I really should get on board.
Yeah.
It took me a while, but eventually I listened, and so now I'm fortunate enough to be working in the same area.
It seems like it's a family of high achievers, if I'm not wrong.
It was quite a competitive family,
Yeah,
yes.
I can imagine that. No, that's brilliant. And obviously you are the right person to speak to, I think, the audience of teachers and students wanting to know about exactly what cyber physical systems are until we get down to the details of defining what those elements are. Can you explain a little bit about who is CSIRO and what is Data 61?
So CSIRO is Australia's national science agency, and Data 61 is essentially the digital innovation arm of CSIRO.
Yep.
So within Data 61, we get to work on all the fun stuff like developing new robots and sensing technologies that we can use to either conduct scientific experiments or actually just to do research on how we can advance those technologies.
Yeah. So all the cool stuff, literally, with all the fun toys.
Definitely.
Well, let's talk robotics. It's what we're here to talk about. There are a couple of different terminologies that I want to make sure that the listeners can understand clearly. Yep. If I may list them, we'll go one at a time. I feel like, firstly, the word mechatronics gets thrown around. What's mechatronics all about?
Yeah, so mechatronics is just a made-up word, which is mechanical married with electronics.
I see.
So traditionally, if you study engineering at university, you would have been made to choose between mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. But for robotics engineers, we really want people who know a bit about mechanical engineering, but also a bit about electrical engineering. And so many universities have now, mushed those terms together to form mechatronics.
I see.
Because it actually illustrates that marriage between mechanical and electrical engineering.
Yeah. Makes sense. What about the term robotics?
Well, in my view, robotics just is indicative of an intelligent machine. So it's a very broad term, but really encompasses any machine that has intelligence.
Yep, that's good. And what about cyber physical systems?
So cyber physical systems is really just a fancy term for explaining how we can get the digital world to communicate with the physical world. So that's where the cyber component of it comes, the digital component, and the physical component, which is actually how you get these digital technologies operating in the real world in something like a robot that actually has to move around and take action in the physical environment that we exist in.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And obviously, one of the things that comes to the mind of everyone is the Terminator movies from the 1980s and even now. So just to put it in context, are those machines, the Terminators, cyber physical systems?
Yes, they are.
They are. There you go. I had to ask you that. But how do, obviously, these technologies, they're going to have a major impact in how different fields are going to be functioning in the next couple of years to the 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. What does that look like, and how do these technologies play a role in the 21st century?
They're going to play a critical role in the 21st century because we are a global economy at the moment, so no nation can really exist in isolation.
Absolutely.
And these advances are occurring across the world, and I think the real challenge for countries, especially countries that are small, like Australia, is how we can keep up with a lot of these technological advances and use them to our advantage, because they are just economically an imperative for our country. We can't really expect to maintain our standard of living unless we can keep up with these technological advances. So I think really the role that these are going to play is in expanding the range of things that economies currently are capable of doing, and again increasing the efficiency with which we do things, but also hopefully improving the safety and also helping to improve the health and well-being of the populations of every nation.
Yeah. Now that does make sense. And do you think it's something that will become almost every day, like we need to be able to use computers? So do you think that robotics will come to even that level of commonality between anyone?
Yes, and I think that that's already happening. I think probably some people have robots in their own home and they don't even think about them. So if you think of something like a robotic vacuum cleaner,
absolutely,
after it's been in someone's house for a while, they probably don't even think about it as a robot. So it's an interesting thing. Once something becomes a useful tool in your environment, then I guess you stop thinking about it. And so, I think robots will slowly infiltrate our lives and perhaps we won't even notice.
It's a bit scary. Especially when we put it that way, where we won't notice. So I think it's important for that next generation to understand and be aware of those things while they move forward with it. And so obviously with robotics comes a very common word that gets thrown around these days a lot. It's AI. And obviously there's AI in every pocket that walk around with a smartphone. So what about AI? How does that come into play along with robots, along with the future of work? What are your thoughts on AI?
Well, I guess it's inextricably linked with robotics and sensing systems and a lot of the aspects of cyber physical systems. So sometimes we talk about the work that we do as embedded artificial intelligence. So it's artificial intelligence that has been put on something that operates in the physical environment, so in the world around us. So not just as a software program on a computer, it's artificial intelligence that might be helping to operate your camera or to operate something that actually is in the physical world. So I think that both robotics and AI are going to have a huge influence on what the future of the whole world looks like.
Absolutely. And what does that look like in terms of when we understand that even we're used to almost our music player or the music app to actually learn what music choices we like simply by the data that we input it, or the social media algorithms that happen. How else can this come to a point where do you think that AI can one day even learn emotions? It's obviously a question that I get asked a lot. Do you think that emotions is something that can be replicated by AI?
Definitely it can be replicated, but then they're not really emotions.
Yeah.
It's a machine pretending to have
Yeah.
emotions because it can recognize what they are and it can replicate them, but that's not the same thing as actually having emotions.
True. And what about creativity? Because this is also I've seen articles about this. We've seen videos where robots are actually creating beautiful work of art, and they can manufacture a beautiful piece of furniture. But creativity is it's almost a human element. What are your thoughts on AI and creativity?
I think artificial intelligence is actually going to augment human creativity, because what artificial intelligence can do is actually open up our minds to possibilities that perhaps we wouldn't have considered. So I'll give you an example. In our work, we often apply machine learning to how we might design a robot, the material that we design the robot out of, and even use machine learning to encourage the robot to learn the function that it has to do in the world. And by using machine learning, essentially all that is a way of churning through a whole range of possibilities and trying to come up with the most optimal solution. And in doing that, sometimes machine learning will come up with a solution that a person might never have thought of, simply because it can churn through so much data. And I think that's really where it's going to help augment human creativity, because as you know, we all try and cope in this knowledge-intensive world, we need tools around us that are going to help us, one, make sense of all of that data and help to, put it into a form that other people can understand. But I think it will also open our eyes to possibilities that we haven't thought of before. So sometimes in using machine learning to have a look at how we should design our robots means that we come up with some shapes and forms that are really quite unusual and that people find quite strange. But you know, there's also a real beauty and a seeming creativity. But again, it's a bit of a fake creativity. But having said that, I think that is an important step in terms of expanding human creativity, because it's like opening your mind up to extra possibilities. So you know, sometimes people ask, why should we invest any money in doing space exploration? And it's precisely because it expands our minds. It makes us think about possibilities that, you know, don't even exist here on Earth. And in doing that, we become more creative.
Absolutely. I think with expanding our mind, I think it comes with the risks involved and the positives. There are always positives and negatives, and I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about AI, and because it's something unknown, there's that fear involved. And one of the questions that always comes up is, do you think that AI can replace creativity and emotions of a human being? No. That's good. That's actually where I think I stood as well, because it's a tool to enhance our understanding, and it's exactly right. So in terms of the next generation of future professionals and leaders and innovators, what should they do to stay on top of AI, or even learn about AI so that it becomes one of those everyday skills?
Yeah, I think, you know, fear of artificial intelligence and fear of robots is simply fear of the unknown. So the more that you can do to educate yourself about artificial intelligence and robotics, the better equipped you are to deal with the future. And I think, fortunately too, because we live in such a knowledge-intensive age, there are plenty of tools that you can access to gain that knowledge. So you can go online right now and sign up for a course that will help you understand how to code, help you understand about machine learning, and you don't have to do that to anyone's timetable but your own. And I think fortunately too, there are communities developing and meetup groups where you can actually go on that learning journey with other people who have similar interests. So I think it's something that people can actually help themselves, and the tools are pretty much at everyone's disposal if you have access to the internet.
Yeah. That's fair enough. And the other thing I think comes along with AI is how that's actually replacing mundane everyday jobs, and obviously that's resulting in job losses. And I think I get this question asked a lot from teachers, is how do we prepare our students for jobs that don't exist now, and the jobs that we do now might not exist because it's been replaced by AI. And How do you tackle that? And do you think that's actually a true fact that it will result in job losses, or do you think it's at that point of evolution at the moment?
I think you have to distinguish between jobs and tasks, because I think it's very true that artificial intelligence and robotics will replace a huge number of tasks. However, most jobs actually consist of a number of tasks put together. And in some cases, jobs might consist of tasks that actually humans aren't very well suited to, or even are dangerous to humans. So if we can find ways for artificial intelligence or for robots to be able to do those tasks, that's actually a good thing. Humans are actually not that good at mindlessly repetitive work.
Absolutely.
Which is where artificial intelligence and robotic process automation can be really very useful. Now, yes, I understand people are fearful of losing jobs, and I think jobs of the future will certainly be different and probably have quite different names. And that's why we really need to make sure that we have the education supports to help people to transition, in different careers, and to make sure that if some of the tasks that they are responsible for are being able to be done by artificial intelligence or robotics, then they can identify and train up in the tasks where robots and artificial intelligence are not strong at all. And there are plenty of those.
Yeah. That's the thing. And I think it's that distinguishment between tasks and the thinking behind it, because we do need to look at it as a tool that can enhance. So even though the jobs that we know today might not exist in that next 5 years, it might have 3, 4, 5 different job opportunities that stem from it, just because of enhanced attributes from AI. So that's great. And looking at the different industries that can be affected by AI, do you have any examples of applications of how AI might play in, let's say, medical or legal or business or automation? Do you have any examples of them?
Yeah, there's quite a few ways that artificial intelligence and robots are already being used in everyday business. So if you look at a hospital, for example, many new hospitals are built with quite a lot of infrastructure in, I guess, what I'd call the back of house of the hospital. So areas where most people wouldn't see, but where you have robots or automated ground vehicles actually transporting all of your materials. So things like your linen, food, any sort of equipment and supplies, even pharmaceuticals. And those things are, I guess, replacing manual tasks that often can cause injury in people. So you can have all of this happening and delivering things within hospitals, so doing a lot of logistics functions, but the people in the hospital probably are never aware that those things are occurring. So plenty of hospitals already have those sort of facilities. I guess the other area where artificial intelligence is starting to play an important role is in actually churning through a lot of the medical data that we have to come up with solutions that might not be apparent to, or that would take a long time for people to figure out without that extra assistance. So, a good example of that is computer vision. So looking at different x-rays and figuring out, is this something that's typical of, something that, is a medical concern. And we know that using artificial intelligence, we can probably identify some things and train it up so that it's better than a medical specialist doing the same job. But that doesn't mean that medical specialist is still not important. It just means that you're actually saving them a lot of time by going through a lot of this repetitive checking different vision and comparing it with previous cases. That part of it can all be automated, but it doesn't automate the part where the specialist actually has to come up with a diagnosis and a treatment plan.
And obviously that kind of thing can literally save lives.
Yes, and I think that perhaps in the future, if people had the choice and they could see that, the chances of, for example, something being detected in an X-ray are actually higher if you use artificial intelligence, then, there might come a time when people demand access to those technologies.
Makes sense. What about in, let's say, advanced manufacturing? I feel like that's listed as one of the main job loss industries right now. Within advanced manufacturing, I'm talking a whole array of different industries like retail, food, manufacturing, and so on. What are your thoughts on how AI and cyber physical systems can affect and evolve those industries?
Well, I'm actually more aware of job creation in advanced manufacturing from robotics. And that is because robotics and AI can actually make businesses more profitable. And so sometimes by changing a small part of a process and making it more efficient and making the overall process more economic and profitable, it can actually lead to the opportunities for more jobs. So one example of that in manufacturing is, for example, things like panel beating. In general, that's a very labour-intensive task, and in many cases that's a task that they send offshore to be done because, Australia's labour costs are comparatively high.
Absolutely. Yeah.
However, if you can actually do that task with a robot, that means that you can bring that task back into Australia, potentially make that job more profitable, and then employ more people in the business. And so you're essentially bringing work or reshoring jobs back to Australia. They might just be slightly different jobs.
Yeah, I think that's where the misconception comes in, where the label changes that existing job that, as we know, may not exist, but it's actually, like you said, creating more jobs for people by allowing companies and different organizations to be more profitable and automating processes. So that's great. I think that's music to ears when teachers listen to this, because that's been one of their biggest concerns. And if we take a step back towards the school's environment and kids that are in school right now who's entering the industry in the next 10, 20 years, what are the key skill sets that they need to succeed in what involves AI and cyber physical systems, in your opinion?
Well, I think that students should all stick with as high level maths and as many science subjects as you can right up until the end of high school. And then if you decide that you don't want to have a career in engineering or science, well, that's fine. I think it's still actually a very good background in any job, because it helps you to be creative and to, I guess, have a really good grasp of creative problem solving. And so apart from those things, I think people skills are never going to be something seriously threatened by robots and artificial intelligence. So there will always be a need for those, I guess some people call them the soft skills, actually being able to get along with people, work as a team. In fact, there might be an increasing importance placed on those skills in the future. But in essence, I would encourage everyone to just do as much science and maths as they possibly can while they're in high school, and then I think the rest will all work out for itself afterwards.
So you mentioned creativity just before. How did you mean that from a school context? Is that arts? Is that design? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think arts and design are also critical to any sort of future in cyber physical systems and robotics. I also see science itself as a very creative enterprise, and I think it has elements of design that perhaps really aren't often pulled out when people think about science. But I think it is a creative endeavour in its own right. But yeah, I think when I emphasise science and maths, that wasn't to de-emphasise English, arts and design. It's just that unfortunately we know that a lot of people, particularly women, are dropping out of science and maths before they even finish high school. And I think that that's a trend that we can't sort of see continue. It means that unfortunately, when we're creating new technologies, they're going to be created by one gender alone, and that's not a very healthy situation.
True. Yeah. And why? What's the cause behind that? Are you aware of any reasons?
Well, I think that we live in a very gendered society, and it's not just true in Australia, it's true in a lot of other countries as well, where people think if you have a certain job, then that's really associated with a certain gender. So we have less men in professions like teaching and nursing. We have more men in professions like engineering and science. And that's not to say that women aren't suited to engineering and science, or that men aren't suited to nursing and teaching. And in fact, at different points in history, there have been far more male teachers than female teachers. So it really is about our society's perception of what jobs are suitable for different genders, and people assimilate that from a very young age, unfortunately, and that then infiltrates the choice of subjects that people do at school.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to correct. So some people believe, and one reason that I was selected as a superstar of STEM was an effort to try and show that there are women in some of these areas that are traditionally male dominated. And so it is a potential career path. And I guess not only is it a potential career path, I think people don't see the downside of not having women involved in the creation of technologies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yet there is a whole litany of poorly designed technologies that would have benefited if they'd been designed by a more diverse team. A good example of that is car airbags. So it's a great safety feature. However, for 40 years, actually the introduction of airbags led to a disproportionate number of injuries amongst children and women. And that's because airbags were designed solely on crash test dummies that were modelled on the average American male.
Wow.
So if you didn't conform to the size and shape of an average American male, that actually meant that you were more likely to be injured when car safety airbags deployed.
Wow.
And unfortunately, it took 40 years worth of research on accidents to discover that this was an issue. Whereas you would have to think or imagine that if a diverse team had been involved in the design of those safety features from the very beginning, someone might have pointed out that not everyone looks like the
that's the ironic
American
part.
Male.
Even I would probably get injured by that because I'm actually below average of my height. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the key word, diversity. And I think that opens up the door to involving other cultures as well. Just because I feel whenever it comes to a designing process, bringing those different mindsets into the same table always provides a better outcome. And it's been the case when we walk through design thinking as well. And I feel like that you said many of the words that are valued within, that are the core values of design thinking. So I wanted to ask you, how important do you think design thinking is within AI, robotics, and those kinds of fields?
Oh, it's critical. I think everyone should know how to do design thinking. It really is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my forte, so I'm very happy to hear that from you. But bringing it back to, I think, how the current education system, there's obviously gaps in how they transition from secondary to tertiary and then tertiary into industry. So in looking at educating our teachers and educators, do you have any advice for the schools and universities on this area of with AI and cyber physical systems, on how they could change or adopt or evolve their teaching approach to better prepare their students?
Yes, I think that in general we have to have a much more nimble approach and maybe a more flexible approach to learning. So there are so many excellent online resources that would support people in getting a better understanding of artificial intelligence and robotics. And yet I think that, you know, we are limited in the structure. We have quite a rigid curriculum. When you get to university, you have a very rigid degree structure. So yes, you can change different subjects, but you know, really the universities are there to encourage you to get a degree, not to just spend 6 weeks learning a particular thing. So I think in the future what we'll see is that it's much more common for people to just dip their toes into subjects and out again as necessary. So maybe spending 6 weeks learning about deep learning, for example, and then coming away and applying that, rather than going, okay, well, I need to know about artificial intelligence and deep learning, please sign me up for a 4-year university degree. No, you don't need to do that. And I don't think at the moment, apart from community efforts, that we actually have a very structured way to help people to have that flexible learning experience, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think it has a perception of it can be very complex. So it's almost like when you speak to the students of today, they think it's out of their reach if they don't have that self-belief. But I feel that when it comes to these complex areas, it's, even though it might be perceived as complex, it's actually the mindset to be able to solve one step at a time and move through things and work with people, whether in teams, whether in big teams, whether individually, and then coming back. And these key skill sets that can allow people to succeed in this area. So that's great. I think that's brilliant. That's all for today, and thank you so much for coming on board, Sue. I think a lot of the teachers will take away a lot from what you have shared, so thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, that's it for today, but if you haven't already done so, make sure you jump online to roshansenanayake.com/podcast and click on today's episode for the show notes from today. There are direct links to Sue on her LinkedIn profile. Please connect with her and support what she's doing as well. Lastly, if you haven't done so already, make sure you click subscribe and share the love with a review, and I will make sure to personally read it out for the listeners of over 14 different countries and get your name out there. So till next time,